Vasyl Ivanchuk is really under the cosh. He's 3 games down in this 10-game match. He's playing a 17-year-old whiz kid, Alireza Firouzja. He's got the black pieces here, which makes it even harder to strike back, but he has to get a point on the board. So the full match details are below. Let's get into this one now. Alireza kicks off with pawn to d4 here once again. We have knight f6, and the bishop comes to g5, going in for this Trompovsky system. Vasyl goes e6 once again. We have pawn e4, setting up the big centre. This is the whole idea. And now h6 is most common, but Vasyl goes for a sideline, pawn to c5. In their first game in this line, Alireza went pawn to e5 here, but this time he adopts to go pawn d5. Ivanchuk captured that one, and now Alireza already invested 2.5 minutes at this point thinking about how to proceed, so he's not quite in his comfort zone, and he went pawn to e5 here. He could have taken on d5 with the pawn. Now that knight is pinned to the queen, but queen e7 saves the day here because it pins this pawn to the white king behind it. Now you could go queen e2 as white, but then black goes pawn h6. If you drop the bishop back here, then pawn g5, and the game goes on. Both players will win minor pieces. It's double-edged. But instead of queen e2, Alireza went pawn to f4. Now we had queen e6. It maintains the pin of this pawn, but also steps out of the line of this bishop, x-raying behind the knight. And now here again, Alireza spent 2 minutes on this next think. So he should go knight c3 here. It attacks this pawn, covers e4, and can come quickly into this b5 square. But Alireza went for knight e2 instead, not as precise because it does allow knight g4 here, which is really nice, coming into these dark squares. d4 is coming, but Vasyl missed it. He went knight to e4 here instead. Still a nice move though, it centralizes that knight, it hits this bishop, and Alireza responds in the best fashion. He plays this knight out to c3, and although black can now pick up the bishop pair by taking on g5, Alireza can take here, and although white is a minor piece down, you can't actually save this knight by bringing it back because we fork on c7, you're picking up the queen. So here Vasyl has to respond to that. He plays king to d8, covering the square. Now we had this knight coming across to c3, and it's a really nice play by Alireza. He covers the c4 square from the knight, and it doesn't actually have anywhere to go if we actually examine the jumps it's got, so it's still trapped for the time being. Now we had knight to c6 developing, and now here Alireza should go after this piece. So best was h4, preparing to pick it back up. What Alireza does is queen to d2, but now knight d4 was actually a nice response, because if you take it now, then we're going queen takes on e5 with check. It's not so great. If you try pawn h4, well then there's a beautiful check on the f3 square here. After takes, we're picking up the queen. So there's some problems now after this knight d4 move, but Vasyl missed a play like that. Instead he went pawn f6, trying to rip open this centre here, but Alireza responds in an excellent fashion. He doesn't even capture this knight. Once again, he leaves that piece. He goes castles queenside, giving an entire piece now, because the knight was played back to f7 by Vasyl. He saves the minor piece. Alireza's a piece down, but he does have a lot of pressure. Look at this king in the centre. Look at these horrible bishops. So Alireza needs to keep the initiative going here. Best was knight b5, coming into the c7 square, but he first flicks in this takes on f6 move, but this allows Chucky just the time to bring the knight to d6 and cover the b5 square. Now Alireza jumps in anyway. He only has 22 seconds left. It's getting really tight on the clock. Chucky still has 6 minutes, but they do get 5 seconds increment. And now rook to b8 was played, coming away from this fork here on the c7 square. And here Alireza chucks in a tactic low on time. He takes on a7 here. It's not the best, but it's tricky. Now the piece wasn't immediately recaptured. If it was, then queen a5 comes. You block with pawn b6, then you pick up the knight. Very tricky position still. But instead of doing this, Ivanchuk went knight to e4, hitting the queen, and now Alireza chucks in knight takes on c6 check. And he's setting a little trap here, because if you take with either of the pawns, let's say the b pawn takes, well, now you've blocked the defense here. You can go queen a5 check, and suddenly the king has nowhere to go but the e8 square. We dive in like this, we pick up the queen. So black has to be very careful here, and that's why Chucky takes this knight back with the queen. And now Alireza still doesn't move his queen here. Instead, he throws in takes on g7. You now can't take the queen, or we take the rook in the corner and make a new queen. So the bishop captured on g7. Now this queen drops back to e1, and it's also looking to bounce around this h4 square, start giving checks. Note also that the knight covers c7, so this could get very dangerous. So Vasyl now plays rook to e8. The knight was attacked here, so he had to defend it. And now you can go queen h4 immediately, but first bishop b5 was played. Again, a classic tricky Alireza move, because if you capture that bishop, then this check comes with a vengeance. You can't move the king out, so you'd have to block with the minor piece. You'd take like this, and black's in trouble. Rook e7 is the best move, should technically be a draw, but lots of pressure. If you take with the bishop, the queen's coming in, lots of checks against the king, this rook is loose, this one's coming to the e-file, big problems for black. So we didn't have the bishop captured on b5. Here we had the move queen h6. Vasyl correctly assesses that he should block this square from the checks. Now we had queen a5 check, so it switches to the other side of the board. Really beautiful geometry. The pawn blocks, and now queen a7 was played, attacking this undefended rook. So it nudges up to b7, the queen comes to a8, now this bishop is pinned, and there's a threat to go bishop to a6, attacking down here. But here Vasyl actually just ignores it. He goes knight to f6, and it's a nice practical decision in the time pressure, because although bishop a6 comes, he picks up here on d5. Yes, white wins this one, but then queen f4 check, the king moves away, and now the knight jumps back. So it covers this point, and black's actually looking okay here. The position's now technically level, but Alireza gets too focused on his own plans here. So he wants to go rook e1, eliminate this knight, but black has threats down here against this pawn. The queen is swinging in, so you had to go, say, pawn to c3 here, cover those threats. But what Alireza does is bring this rook to the e-file, threatening to eliminate this knight, then check here. But this allowed queen b4, threatening mate in 1. If b3, this is absolutely deadly on the dark squares. So we had pawn c3, but this can be captured using the pinned pawn. The rook is hit, it has to come to e2, hold the checkmating attack, and black's getting a big initiative now, because the king comes to c7, it forces the bishop to capture here, and after the knight recaptures, there's big problems because you can't check here, the knight's a beautiful defender of the king, and you can't capture this undefended rook, or you get checkmated here. So white ducks back to f3, holds this rook. There was an exchange here, the queen recaptured, holding the checkmating threat, but now bishop d4, and look how super solid Vasyl's position is. He's got the two minor pieces against the rook, white's in all sorts of trouble. So pawn a3 from Alireza, the queen came to b3, rook d3 hit it again, it switched back to f7 here, and after rook to f3 hitting it one more time, we had a check on g6, king a2, and knight d6. Vasyl's bringing his forces into the game, really tough for white now. So rook g3 hit the queen again, it checked from f7 here, and now the rook blocks the check, but this is not a beautiful square for the rook. It's now pinned to the king has to stay and hold it, the knight might be coming in soon, lots of problems. Queen d5 centralized, beautiful stuff from Vasyl. Queen a6 was played, attacking this pawn, trying to shake it up. c4 was actually very powerful here, hitting the rook, opening up the defense like this, but instead we had knight c8, covers the point, still more than adequate, big advantage to Vasyl, but can he finish it off in the time pressure? He's lost the last 3 games on time, of course. So Alireza switches back, he goes queen to d3, and he's trying to create some tricky tactics here. If c4 was played, then he'd probably have gone queen c2, pinning the pawn, then he'll activate the rook. He's now broken this pin here. All very tricky stuff, but black is still better. But instead of c4, Vasyl kept it very simple. He just took on g2 here. Now Alireza picked up on h7. That's what he was able to do. But now knight d6 came. Pawn h4 got that one going, but knight c4 is deadly. There's 3 pieces attacking b2. It's about to cave in. So the queen drops back, but then queen d5 played. Another centralizing move, and there's just so many threats. Knight d2, knight a5, knight takes on b2 here. Alireza can't cope with it. He can't calculate everything. Here he actually loses on time. So Vasyl strikes back. It's now 3-1 in the match. If you never want to miss a video in this series, then do subscribe to the channel. And if you haven't seen the Magnus Alireza playlist, click here. Thanks for watching. See you soon.